Greetings, fellow guitar travellers, it's Rowan J. Parker here, and guess who we've got today? We've got Mr.
Levi Clay.
Mr. Levi Clay, the incredibly interesting, let's say outspoken, sometimes controversial, but always worth talking to, and probably talking about. So we thought we'd get Levi on because he's now living, believe it or not, up in Wishaw, which is just outside of Glasgow. So the first thing to ask you, Levi, is why on earth, living in London, the metropolis of the universe, did you move to the throbbing heart of a musical creation and yes, the musical, throbbing heart of musical creation and invention that is Wishaw. So I'll tell you what to do rather than just kind of just go because Wishaw's so awesome, because we know it is. Yeah, we know it is. But
I can say that all day. They're never going to believe me.
but maybe it'd be worth kind of just talking about your, how, because it seems such a counterintuitive thing to do. So you could outline the sort of the process by which you got there.
Well, I've lived in London for maybe 8 years now. I moved there to do my degree. And I stayed on and worked for 4-5 years. A relationship that I was in ended, so I needed to move from where I was living, and there was the toss up of, well, I can stay in London or I can actually move anywhere because I make most of my living via the internet, and therefore I'm only going to lose most of my private students are Skype lessons, so I'm not going to lose all that much. I can actually go anywhere. And looking at guys like Tom Quayle, who lives in Leeds, I've always sort of said to Tom when I was living in London, why are you not in London? And I never really understood it until I saw where he lives. He lives in a nice place and he can afford to live in a nice place because he earns good money. And so I just sort of made the decision that I could stay in London, and I'm sure we'll talk about London some more at some point. But it's a very stifling place to live as a musician. It's kind of like LA in the sense that it's not the magic place that people would convince you that it is. I mean, it is if you want to do certain things, but for what I do and for a lot of what my friends do, it was a very stifling place. So I weighed up a few options of where I might want to consider relocating to, and Wishaw was high on the list, if only because I know so many people up here from coming up to Andy McLaughlin's master classes. I met so many people up here, such kind people, and that's the thing for any of you out there that have visited Scotland. The people here are just real friendly, like really friendly, very nice people. They say hello to you on the streets. Like, coming from London, like, you don't make eye contact in London.
Look away.
Yeah,
look away.
Up here, that's just totally not the case. Everybody is incredibly social. So I just liked trying to get my life in balance and trying to have a bit of a social life as well as the professional life. Because in London, I was working 10 hours a day most days of the week just to make ends meet.
Yeah,
Whereas
pay the bills.
Yeah, up here, I don't need to do that.
No, you don't need to do that. I mean,
4 hours or,
The thing in London is just, it's number one, it's like the rent, it's just freaking outrageous.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
It's just
we were paying £1,100 a month for a little two-bed.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's just
astonishing.
That's nuts. And if you don't mind me asking, what are you paying in rent in Wishaw?
Well, I live in a sort of castle. It's not a castle. It's
I live in a castle.
Yeah,
does it have a drawbridge?
No. It was,
so disappointed.
It was the old stage. I live in the old stage, the coach house for Coltness House, which was an old mansion in Coltness, and the mansion's long gone. So there's just this massive. It looks like a castle, as far as I'm concerned. Like, when I came up here and wanted to meet girls, I absolutely assure you that when you say I live in a castle, they would come, and the amount of people that looked and went, holy shit, you do live in a castle. So I pay a bit too much. I pay $4.50 for my place.
But still, you're not going to get a castle down in London.
You're not going to get a castle down in London.
Just as a complete aside, do you know that my dad actually went and bought a real castle?
Really?
Yeah, and what he got with the castle is he got the castle and he got a title. So he was, cutting about, calling himself the Lord or whatever it was. I can't remember where it was. It was Campbelltown, up in Campbelltown. And we visited it, and you think, right, my dad owns a castle, and then you actually get there and the whole thing is really quite disappointing because it's huge, but it's like really run down and it's damp, and just because you can cut about and call yourself the Lord of Campbelltown doesn't really seem to make up for the fact you've just got this massive pile.
One of the sticking points in my last relationship is we were talking about buying a place, and obviously in London, she wanted to be in London, she works in music publishing, and I didn't need to be in London. I went, we can live outside of London, you can commute in, and but she's hell-bent on, still is, we're still very close friends, she's still hell-bent on buying in London, and the real turning point was when I looked at property prices for London and showed her that for the money you can buy a one-bed flat in London or a two-bed flat in London, you can buy a castle in Italy
Wow.
A castle
Wow.
in Italy. What? Oh, London. I
Right.
love
So
it.
I mean, really, what I mean, and this is just it just goes to show how much things have changed, or how technology has enabled you to do things in a completely different way. Because both Levi and I really run, for all intents and purposes, what is an online business.
Yep.
And we do some things, obviously face to face, and we have to do a bit of travelling and so on. But in terms of your core business, it's run online, and therefore you can do it anywhere. So although it might seem initially, people, I'm sure there are some, budding musicians out there thinking, oh, move to London, that's the metropolis, that's where I'm going to make it as a career. Honestly, the answer to that is not so much. And I think also in a place like London, I mean, there's so many musicians there.
Yeah.
And so you're just a kind of a small fish in this rather huge pond.
Well, I mean, I can give that perspective for anyone that's wanting to go out and do the gigging thing. Why is my phone? Leave me alone.
It's because you're so popular.
Yeah, I
Levi.
know. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's my dad. So the perspective that I can bring there is, like, obviously recently I've been caught up in this debate of real musicians gig. And actually gigging is something I love doing. Like in my band Hellcat Molly, we built up a following gigging around London. But the reality of gigging in London is that it's very much a pay-to-play scenario.
Yeah.
And I know that exists in Glasgow.
Yeah, it
but
does. Somewhat. Not to the same extent, but it does exist.
What I noticed in London is it's promoters wanting to make a quick buck off the new band, because the new band is going to bring their girlfriends down, their mum for their first gig, and they
rent them, what we would call that.
Spit them out, and the job done. Whereas up here, the amazing thing is I can go to like my local pub on a Friday or Saturday, and it'll be packed because there's music on, which is an amazing feeling. People just appreciate music. So if you want to go out and do the gigging thing, like you don't need to be in London to find gigs, because actually the scary thing is all the venues in London are closing.
Right.
They're just. Whereas up here, you can actually get paid to play in a pub.
Yes, you
like
can.
That's absolutely
can.
Cool.
You can. You still can.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that there are pay-to-play venues in Glasgow, but those sorts of venues are really geared or aimed towards the really young bands just starting out, and they'll put them on a bill with like 4 or 5 other acts. And the way they do it, the pay-to-play thing is the way that they do that is the venue will have a PA, and they will insist that you use the in-house PA, and they say, well, you have to hire. You have to pay for the hire of that PA. You have to pay for the engineer that we will supply you, and it's the only way you can get to play in our venue. And they'll put, say, 4 or 5 bands on the bill, and these 4 or 5 bands will have to give whatever it is, £100 each for the privilege of using the PA.
I never experienced that.
Well, I mean, there are certain places in Glasgow that are doing that. I mean, it's really horribly dishonest, but you're in an invidious position if you're in one of those bands.
Yep.
If you're in a band like that and that's the only platform you've got, then the guys running these venues have got you over a barrel, and they can just go, right, well, we can dictate the terms. It's a very, very sad, but it does happen. Yep. And of course all these young bands, is the way that it works is they're given a whole bunch of tickets to sell.
Yep.
And so they're given like 100 tickets to sell, whatever it is, and they obviously bring all their girlfriends and mates and all that, so they can get the people to come down and see them. But also you bear in mind the venue, it's fantastic. Not only are they getting the band to pay to use the stuff, they're bringing customers to their venue who are going to spend lots of money over the bar. It's just the most outrageous racket.
You've got to be really careful if you find yourself in that position, anyone out there, because there's only so many times you can ask your girlfriend or your parents to come down to a gig.
Absolutely.
And before long, you find your friends start avoiding you because they know you've got a gig coming up, and
That's
you're going
right.
to try and sell them a ticket.
Yeah.
It's not like if you're going out and gigging and the only people that are coming to see you are friends. You don't convince yourself that you're getting somewhere. You're not. When people start to come see you because your band's on, that's when you're starting to do.
It's a bit like selling Amway. Do you know what Amway is?
No.
It's this kind of system they got it's all over the world actually, but it's very prominent in the US, where you become like the salesperson for this product, right? And you've got to sell a certain amount of product to make money. And of course, so what you do is you go to your friends and you try and flog to your friends and your family this kind of fairly useless stuff.
Yeah, you get like Avon over here.
Right, okay. So initially, your friends and your family might be quite supportive, new business and all that, but they're not going to be the same way after 6 months or a year of doing it. They're like, no, we don't need any more of your shoddy products. Thank you very much. So I mean, I think definitely downside, but I mean, it's all to do with the exploitation of the talent. But I mean, it is the music business, so I mean, I know we're a couple of cynical, jaded old monsters. Well, I'm an older monster than Levi, but you know, it is the music business, and you've got to realise that, you know, that generally people don't care about your talent. It's the very last thing on the list.
Yep.
What they really want to know is, can we make money out of you? And if they can, great, and maybe you can make some money too, that's great. But I mean, no one values you for your artistic integrity.
Yep.
And if you think that for a second, you are absolutely delusional. Absolutely delusional. So when you realise that about the music industry, and that's the way it is, I think it's fine, and you can get, you can make some progress, and you can find a way of you know, working it to your advantage. But you know, don't expect.
Yeah,
you know,
that's a really good way of looking at it, and that's kind of what I'm always trying to push. Like, I don't want to use the word enlighten, but I'm going to anyway, because why not? Just enlighten people to the realities of the industry and what's going on out there, so you guys can make informed decisions on how you're going to move forward with your business, because it's very, very hard to make a living in this industry.
I mean, I would say, I mean, I've been, I mean, this has been my sole income for now, for like 25 years. I've been teaching full time for 20 years, so it's been absolutely my sole income for 20 years. And in fact, you know, I was going to say, did you do anything before this? And then I was like, no, I've never had a proper job. This is the only job I've ever had, you know. So I would say that it's definitely become harder to make a living out in the music industry in the last 20 years, for sure. Yeah. For sure it has. And you have to diversify your income stream to such an extent now. You need to be able to do so many things. Yeah. You know, whereas before you could, you know, I know guys who, you know, their whole career was just going out to play in bands. Yeah. They played in cover bands, and, you know, they did weddings or whatever, and that was their thing, and they made a living out of that. It's really hard to do that now. You need at least what?
Well, you've got the 20 plus years of teaching experience, so I don't want to say you're safe, but you're going to do all right, because you can trade off your reputation. Whereas, and you know, there'll be a vlog on this subject coming up when people are going off to music schools now. If you're thinking of going off to music school, it's the best and worst thing you could possibly do.
That could be an interesting subject for the discussion as we get into it, because I've got some really strong views about the state of music education. Because you know, fundamentally, although I have had a long career as a player, my focus has always really been upon music education. Yep. And you know, I've been doing that consistently for the last 20 years, and I've done it in a number of different arenas. So, you know, I hate to say that I'm well qualified to speak about it, but I am well qualified to speak about it. And because I've seen a lot of stuff, I've seen a lot of shit, man. And if you've seen the shit I've seen, you would probably feel the same way. So yeah,
this will be enlightening then, because we come at it from totally different. I've been in it. I came up through it, and I can point out the problems with it. And the point I was trying to make is that a lot of people go off and do these degrees or whatever because they want a career in the industry, and 90% of the people that come out of these degree courses or whatever aren't working in the industry because they're pumping out too many degree qualified musicians.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, in terms of does a music degree have any validity in the music industry? I would argue not really.
Well, we were told to lie, actually. We were told if you ever audition for anything, they ask if you went to music school, say no.
Oh, really?
Because they don't like it.
Right. Yeah.
The industry doesn't like
Well, I think the thing is that unless you're going to be involved in, say, teaching in a state school where a degree may be necessary, or if you're going to become, say, a peripatetic teacher in a secondary school or so on, where, you know, a formal qualification might be necessary, it's really not how the music industry works. Yeah. I mean, any job that I've went for in the music industry has really been by audition. You know, it's been by audition where you've had to show the goods, you've had to meet the person, you've got to demonstrate that you can do what you say you can do. No one is really going to look at your degree and go, well, that you know, you've got this piece of paper that says you can play and I'm willing to accept that. I mean, for instance, one of the things I do for Yamaha as one of their instructors, which means that as well as the training teachers, we're responsible for recruiting teachers, which means they have to be interviewed. And they get put through a fairly horrific playing interview where we really try and get down to what they can play. And the fact that they've got a degree is, for me, it's neither here nor there. It's completely secondary. Yeah. The only way you could say that would be important, it would be if you had two candidates who were, say, equally matched, and one had a degree and one did not. Yeah. Then what you could maybe say is the person with the degree, well, that shows that they can stick at something for 4 years. Yeah. Right, that's a valid point. But, you know, if we saw one guy whose playing was clearly above the level of the guy that had the degree, we pick the guy with no degree who could play well, because that's the criteria. And it really is a fallacy to say that having a piece of paper is going to guarantee you a job in the music industry, because it's just not. It's not the way the industry works.
Even then, like you say, it shows you that someone can stick at something for 4 years. Depends where the degree's from.
Exactly.
Like where I went at the institute, I remember in my third year, someone turned around in the middle of class, third year degree, and saying, how do you harmonise a major scale again?
Ooh.
And I'm just like, this guy's getting the same qualification as me.
Well, I mean, all that really means is that the qualification has been devalued.
Yes.
And then if it's been devalued to the point of meaninglessness, now what the problem with that is that it means that as you say, there's too many degree qualified musicians coming out, being spat out by these universities. But it also means that people with genuine ability and genuine talent, there's no way of differentiating them between the guys who have done the bare minimum or who are really not that good but have yet still got the degree, because on paper you look exactly the same, you know. And really the reality is, you know, all degrees are not created equal, right? and even you know, and this is true between like different, you know, places of education. But even within the same place of education, you can see there's going to be conscientious people who work really hard with real ability who get a degree, and there's going to be guys who we would call wasters, frankly wasters, who come up with the same qualifications. And you know, so for that reason, I don't think, you know, a music degree really is indicative of anything anymore.
It's not.
I mean, it may be, but you really need to see the guy play and listen and play and see what they can do, see what they know. I mean, the reality is, and I've talked this before, most players, you can listen to a player and think, well, that's a great player, and then you kind of scratch the surface of what they know. You peel back the veneer of what they know, and what's underneath is some rather horrible
see
MDF.
What they show you, and
it's a bit like when you buy a really expensive looking kitchen, you know, and you look at the kitchen and it all looks wonderful, and it's real oak veneer, right? And it looks good on the surface, and then, you know, after 6 months it starts to fall apart because it's just a veneer on top of some rather tacky MDF cabinets, right? So it's a bit like that.
The tragedy though is, and spoilers for when this vlog eventually hits, I'd still, if I could go back in time machine and do everything again, I wouldn't change it. I still would have gone and done my degree, not because of what they presented me, but because it presented me with 3 solid years of being able to really get my shit together, and not with the stuff they were teaching me, but to get my head around how the industry works, find my niche, and spend 3 years building up enough of a business so that when I came out I had a business. Most of the other guys on the course, they didn't worry about that. They just learnt what was on the course. They came out and went, shit, how do I make a living? And I'm like, I don't know, guys, I'm too busy working to answer that question.
I can't answer your email, I'm too busy. It's very true. I mean, there are upsides to going to college, and I think that's more to do with you know, networking and who you might meet and the contacts you might meet and the friendships you might develop, and some of which can last a very long time. So we're not saying it's devoid of merit, but I think that at this point there's enough question marks being placed upon the validity of it that, you know, I'm going to start questioning the necessity for it. Because I think if you're good, really, you know, if you're good, you'll be good, and you'll find a place.
Yep.
You'll find a place because people will be attracted by the fact that you're obviously self-evidently so capable.
Yep.
You know. So
if you wanting to put yourself in £20,000 of debt or whatever, you know, wherever you are, whatever the cost is, a smarter solution might be to not worry about the bit of paper you get at the end. If I spent £20,000 on private lessons with the teachers that I admired and respected when I went to the institute, I'd be a better player than I am now. Yeah. But unfortunately, I only got an hour a week with the tutors I respected. I also had to do an hour of playing congas. Not joking.
Was it in a line? Was it a conga line?
There'd be more use for that.
Yeah. I used to imagine you holding conga class in a little line.
Proper learning to play all this stupid African percussion, because you know that when they wrote the course they thought, wow, you know, this will look really good to the people who's validating the course.
I see.
This isn't practical. I got 1 hour of reading skills a week. It's like, no, give me 3 hours of that, get rid of the backing vocals and get rid of the percussion, because I want to be able to read better than I can.
Yeah. This is just a blatant opportunity for telling some really terrible musical jokes. All right, so how do you know when there's a backing singer knocking at your door?
Too many dirty in you.
Clean, keep it clean.
Go on.
How do they know? Because they never know when to come in.
I like it. There's too many guitarist sight reading jokes, but
I won't inflict them on you. It's mostly drummer jokes I do anyway.
Well, when you do reading jokes or drummer jokes, if they're in good spirit, they're funny. Whereas because I can read well, it feels cheap making reading jokes, because I don't want to look down my nose at people. Because reading. No,
but it's a truism though.
Yes, there is a lot of truism, but I hate that. I kind of try and make this point to a lot of people that come to me and they want to get really good at reading, and I say, look, just you've got to balance skills out. You've got to know what you're going to need working professionally.
Sure.
I spent a lot of time getting my reading really good, really good. I've never been paid to read anything.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
And I hate that, but
Yeah, but I mean, I think I've talked about this before. I mean, what makes a complete musician, and that's part of the thing that makes a complete musician. If you're going to, I mean, you can make the argument that I'm doing what I'm doing, and I don't need to read because the thing I do doesn't require it. Yeah. I'm going to say, well, that's absolutely fine. That's a valid position, but you can't really then argue that you have the same roundedness as someone who can do all that and can read.
Yeah.
And I think also the thing about reading is that there would be something wrong with speaking the language and not understanding the written form of the language you're trying to speak.
Yep.
I mean, that's generally called illiteracy, is it not?
Mm.
You know?
Yep.
I mean, if you think about going for any job and you communicate verbally quite well, but you can't read or write, that implies a certain level of that's problematic.
Yep.
It's problematic. And of course, the music industry is structured in such a way that this is not an absolute requirement, but you are ultimately lying to yourself if you think that it's not important. I mean, I think musical literacy in the end, it's not just being about being able to read or write or transcribe and stuff that you do. It is about understanding music in a much more deep and fundamental way that you never really get to if you don't have an appreciation of notation. I know this sounds like a bunch of elitist idiots telling you, learn to read, you scum. and maybe it is, but it doesn't alter the truth of the statement.
Well, it's more than that. Just having a basic understanding will give you an idea of what something's going to sound like before you play it. I've really sort of tried to push my creativity and my phrasing on my album. And the thing I'm proud of the most is that when I look at the notation, because I've obviously transcribed the whole thing, when I look at the notation, I can look at certain lines and go, that line looks interesting.
Right.
It's not just your typical Paul Gilbert run up or your Jason Becker roller coaster. That thing jumps around and does some difficult stuff. And having that, sitting down and looking at a chart and going, I'd rather play this than this because this looks interesting. Yeah.
It's interesting. Well, you might not know that Levi's a really very capable transcriber. So how did you get into doing that?
That's I'm a very I'm quite OCD about everything. Like, I like detail and I like puzzles and things like that. So to me, transcription always seems like a bit of a puzzle. The idea of listening to a piece of music and then being able to sit down with a piece of paper and an hour later having a complete picture of that piece of music, that always seemed quite fun to me. Like, the last couple of days I've been building a massive Lego thing because fun, puzzles, or building things, creating things, cool. So where it really came from was wanting to play loads of music that wasn't written down. Right.
Okay. Well, that's obvious. Makes sense.
So I wanted to do the kind of the jazz rock fusion thing. And I'd got lots of Mike Stern transcriptions and things like that, but there weren't Jimmy Herring transcriptions or anything like that, so I had to do them myself. But because I could read well, I had a good understanding of what music looks like when it's written down, and what it sounds like when it's written down. So reverse engineering that, I knew that I could, if I can hear music, I can see what it would look like written down. I've done it every day for at least 4 hours, every day for the last 8 years.
Wow.
And I find it very therapeutic, Wow. Like, when work is quiet, I'll often find myself like Brent Mason's second album, Smoking Section. I love that album, it's a great album. And I just decided one day, you know what, I'm going to transcribe that just for me.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, I can't remember the last time I worked as consistently hard at anything.
I really don't consider it work. It really is. I know it sounds ridiculous. It's proper therapy.
You enjoy it. You enjoy it, sure. One of the things I was going to ask you, because I found it interesting, how do you deal with if you're trying to work out a passage and it's just monstrously fast? What would you do under those circumstances if you're hearing just like this massive flurry of notes go by? Have you got like techniques that you use for trying to determine?
When I first started transcribing, I actually remember the first thing I ever transcribed was a solo on a song called Mesmer by the band Pinkley Smooth, who were Sinister Gates band before Avenged Sevenfold. I don't know if any of you out there have heard them or if you've heard them. Really weird stuff. And now listening to it doesn't appeal so much anymore, but I just really liked the intro solo and I wanted to learn it. But I didn't have any software or anything to do transcription, so I was just using Windows Media Player.
Right, wow.
And yeah, and like listening to a bit and trying to hear the note that I wanted and then bringing it back and then slowing it down to half speed because you can do that. But
yeah, sure.
So much wasted time, like dragging back and waiting for the note that you inevitably always miss. Then I discovered a piece of software called Transcribe, which is essential for anybody, not just transcribers, but people practicing music. And in that, I can put the track in, you get the waveform, and I can mark it out, which is actually, people think, I say transcribe, they think that it does the work for you. It doesn't really do any work. It makes working easier. So I can mark out where all the bars are, and I can mark out where the beats are.
Right.
And then I can isolate beats 1 and 2.
Right.
And I can EQ it, and I can slow it down to 25% speed, or low. I think the lowest it goes to 15% speed. Don't do that though, because if you slow music down that fast, you start justifying what you hear. You don't hear it in its truest form.
Right. Okay.
You go, yeah, all right, that works best if I cram it and write it like this. It doesn't really work like that. So EQing and looping is kind of the answer. When I started transcribing, it was one note at a time. Whereas now, like if I'm transcribing some Mad Sean Lane stuff, I don't find it difficult anymore because I can transcribe 8 notes at a time or whatever, because I just hear him play a phrase, I sing the phrase, and if I can sing the phrase, then I can play the phrase.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Well,
the other thing I wanted to ask about is that obviously when you notate something, here's an example, like for instance, if you listen to say any of Ingvi's playing, it's notoriously sort of, let's get asymmetrical, shall we say. So you're not really playing to any particular pulse. So I mean, how do you deal with those sorts of things which, it's not like a nice metrical 16th or 30 seconds, it's just a smear of notes. I mean, do you get into a situation where you've got to try and make some sort of decision about how you notate it?
Yeah, it's a really good question actually, because I think, and I've seen Rowan's music instructional collection, and it's vast like my own. I didn't look through books, but I imagine somewhere in your archive you've got a Malmsteen transcription book.
Yeah, I've got several actually.
And they will have been transcribed by Wolf Marshall.
Wolf Marshall, yeah.
And I don't like his way of transcribing. He'll just take a big block of notes, like 33 notes, and just ram a bracket over it, 33 notes in the space of 16, and be done with it. Though that is an approach, you can do that. When you're writing music out, everything comes down to why you're writing it out, I think. Some music is wonderful when written out, and it can be written down for a reason, whereas Malmsteen's music, it was never really conceived in written form. So it's never going to sit well on the page. You can be really analytical about it though. You can go, okay, well he's playing 4 notes in the first half of beat 1, then he plays 5 notes in the second half of beat 1, then he hits 6 notes, and then you've got that feeling of accelerating. How do you want to write that? Do you want to write the 4 30-second notes, 5 30-second notes, and 6 30-second notes, or do you just want to cram it all down into a group of 11? It depends on who I'm doing the job for and what they want, really. Some people want their favourite piece of music immortalised on a piece of paper, so they can frame it, or I've had guys tattoo phrases on them that they really like. Yeah. Do
you get like a little copyright transcribed by Levi Clay on the tattoo as well?
Brandon. Some guys want that, whereas others, I've had some guys say, I'm not even interested in you writing the rhythm out, you can just write tab on the page if you want, which isn't an option, because all the software I work in, you need to put notation in.
It's not a notation.
But power tab actually, the bars don't need to add up. But yeah, so some guys just want, the Malmsteen thing written out as what the notes are, whereas others want that strict thing. So it depends what the purpose is, what it's for. Yeah. Interesting.
But I can imagine that some things it might be. What's the hardest thing you've ever tried to transcribe?
I'm doing it at the moment. I'm doing some George Bellis at the moment, and the only reason it's anyone that knows George is playing. I do hope George doesn't watch this, because this will be dreadful if he does. But it's just not very good. The playing isn't very good.
Right.
He's got a sound. He's just not my sound. Like, he's kind of the Malmsteen thing, but to the nth degree. He doesn't have nearly as much gain as Malmsteen. And the guy that's sent me this job, he sent me all these long videos, and he was like, I want exactly what he's doing. Like, I want you to put in the picking notation and everything, because I want to know how he gets that sound. And because my ear is at that level now where I'm like a superhero with the world's worst power. I can hear things in slow motion.
Yeah, right.
I listened to it and I just emailed him back and said, well, he's essentially getting his sound by the fact that he's picking hand and he's fretting hand and not in sync.
Right, wow.
So his fretting hand will go down and then a fraction of a second later he'll pick a note.
Right, so
you get that almost weird doubled effect.
Yeah, so basically the left and right hand sync, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. So it's not a bad thing. Like, he's definitely got his sound. It's a pain in the arse to write out.
Man, that's gonna be
and the problem is, it's a 3.5 minute free time, unaccompanied solo. He was just standing in his studio and rocking out. And I've never taken this long on a job. He sent it to me in June, and I've still not finished it.
Right, but is it because that is it just because you just think, oh, not this thing again?
It's because the way I price my jobs is per minute of audio.
Right.
So some jobs like this one, I'll end up really taking a massive hit. I get peanuts for the hours that I'm going to have to put in for this job. And the problem there is I need to bring other money in. So the moment another job comes in, his job goes on the back burner, and he appreciates that. So fortunately,
so I mean, basically, you're doing it for as almost a favour, really. Just like a massive challenge. It's interesting.
But the other hard ones are, it's always like, I did the Sean Lane demo tape, the Shrapnel, the Mike Varney demo tape, which is 2.5-3 minutes of just with punch-ins all over the place. That was a nightmare. And the other hard things I've done have been a bunch of like Holdsworth live solos.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about Holdsworth. I would just imagine that'd be just freakishly difficult. The other thing I was going to ask you about is, how do you determine the fingering? Like, if you provide, like tab or so it's not just this is the notation, these are the notes he's playing, but this is how he's playing it. So I mean, how do you go about determining this is how they would do it, or is it just a matter of, well, this is how I would do it, or this is how I think they would do it?
It's definitely a case of, this is how I think they're doing it. What I find is that if you know a player's style, if you know how they play, you know how Paul Gilbert's going to think.
You know his proclivities.
Whereas if it's a player that you don't really know, there are leaps of faith that you just have to go. I mean, I'm doing Michael Lee Firkin's first album at the moment, and I'm not entirely sure how he's fingering stuff. So because I'm doing the whole album, I'm trying to watch as much live footage of him as possible to
see
really
how he
get
does
into
things.
how he does things.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's just a one-off job, I would just transcribe it the way I would play it.
Right.
I won't send a job off to anybody though, unless I can look at the transcription and honestly say I could play that. Yeah. With enough time, I could definitely play that. Yeah.
Wow. So I think the upshot of all this conversation is, if you need anything transcribed, Levi's your man. Apparently.
No, but no, at the same time, like I started to get a lot of a following online when Dan Smith sent me a question on my Ask FM of top 5 things that guitar players say that you hate, and the last thing that I said was, got tabs, bro. I hate it when people say that, and I didn't really think about what I was saying until afterwards. It was one of those caught in the moment passion things, and I'm really ranting and saying, stop being so fucking lazy. If you want to learn something, don't ask a guy for tabs.
Exactly.
Either buy the tab or work it out yourself. And then it's like, hang on a minute, that's my clientele that I'm bashing there. But it's a time thing.
Well, I mean, my views on tab are, tab is simultaneously the best and worst invention for guitar ever. Right? Let me present my argument, right?
This will be fun.
It's the best invention because, especially if you're just learning, then it's quick, it's immediate, it's very visual, it's very useful for certain sorts of things.
Yep.
Like, say, scales, things like that. And it cuts down the learning time, because one of the things about the necessity of having to learn to read is that engenders, especially for the beginner, erecting a massive barrier in front of them that they have to get over before they can actually play anything. Yep. So you can see in that case the argument for tab is pretty strong. The problem with tab, as we all know, is that it doesn't contain all the information. All it contains is the location of the notes. It doesn't give you any information about, rhythm or any of the expression or articulation on the music. It only contains, not even half the information that's required to produce the actual finished product, and that's why I think it's massively limiting. And I think it also encourages people, not to learn to read and also not to develop their oral skills. But one of the things you really lament is, I don't know how you learnt to play guitar, but when I were a lad learning to play guitar back into the 80s, when I learned to play guitar back in the 80s, the only option you had was really, you had your record collection, and it was a record collection, it was vinyl, you know, and you put the needle on the record, and you just try to figure out what it was by ear, which on one hand was, you know, torturous because it was very slow, took ages to learn things, but what it meant is that one of the first skills that you were developing as you were learning was your oral skills, and that is a thing that I think is, you know, it's basically going the way of the dinosaurs, oral skills. Because, you know, it's also the double-edged sword of all the stuff that's available online, is that, you know, because they've got YouTube and all these resources which are out there which are fantastic and they're all free, you know, and I contribute to that and you contribute to that, so obviously we're exacerbating the problem, you know, but the point is, if you get given everything on a plate, you just say, there you go, that's for you, go away and learn that. It's not encouraging you to learn anything yourself or develop your own identity, and it really is pretty detrimental in the long run. So I think, a bit like the tab thing, massive upside to tab for an immediate quick way in, but the downside is it really limits how much you can develop in the long run. Same thing with all the online tuition we've got. Great immediate resource which is there for people to use, but the downside is it stops you, it stifles your own curiosity about music.
I like your angle on that because I've been working on a piece on the subject for a while now. And it's not picking a side. I'm not picking a side. It's just presenting the case. If you find yourself talking to someone who's completely not interested in hearing your point of view, the argument you can always make is that tab for stringed instruments predates written notation.
Yes, it does.
So in that respect, it's like, well, you can't say it's like the new easy way in because it's old. It's really old. Lute musicians only read tab. But at the same time, you're 100% right, obviously, you know what you're talking about, with the lack of notation, lack of rhythmic notation. And whenever I'm trying to make a case for tab, I guess I'm not clear enough that I believe that if you're going the tab route, you still have to learn to read rhythmic notation.
Oh, absolutely.
When I say tab, the two come together. It's always, if you give me something with tab and no notation above it, game over. I'm not.
No, you can't, because you can't make any sense of it. The only way you can make sense of tablature like that is if you already know how it goes. So, for instance, if you've got if I say to you, right, I'm going to give you the tablature for Sweet Child of Mine, well, you know how the main riff for Sweet Child of Mine goes. So, in that case, it might be useful to you. Or if I just say, here's a scale or an exercise which is played with even eighths or even semiquavers, it's fine. There's no rhythmic information. But the problem with tab is it doesn't contain rhythmic information, and these horrible compromises that are made by attaching like rhythmic sticks onto tablature, I profoundly detest.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of the things that, as an aside, we're going to be rewriting the first two books in the Yamaha syllabus, and in the first Yamaha book, GE1, there is tablature, and sometimes it's given with, you know, the rhythmic notation with sticks, and I profoundly detest that. Yeah. It's horrid. I mean, not only does it look terrible, it doesn't tell you anything useful.
You're always going to meet a compromise, and I think actually that notation has its flaws, I should say, sorry, and tab has its flaws. Neither of them are perfect, but they coexist perfectly together.
Yeah, they do. Well, so what would you say? What would be the main flaw of notation then? Is it that you don't know how it's played?
Yeah, it's the questioning where should this be fingered?
Yes.
Is there position shifts? Obviously, you can notate all of that, but then it's, in my opinion, it's the same sort of thing as putting sticks on tab.
Yeah.
You're just putting so much information in the notation that you end up with the black page.
I agree.
When do you start putting things in like, you know, I'll turn your volume knob down to 6, neck pick up here, like you can add all of these things in, and it's an art form. I actually think it looks beautiful when you see transcriptions of just notation and you see in Roman numerals the positions on the guitar. It looks cool, but it's not practical from a live sight reading setting. Yeah, and there is a difference between sight reading.
I would agree with that, but on the other hand, I mean, all the reading gigs I've ever done, I've never ever been presented with tablature on an actual reading gig ever.
Yeah.
It just never happens.
But you're never going to be asked to like read a Steve Vai solo.
No, fair enough.
Or
fair enough.
Like a Brent Mason solo or something like that. Whereas fingerings, I think.
So really, all you're saying then is what you're really pointing out is the limitation of the instrument, because the guitar you can play the same notes in so many locations, and the fingering permutations for anything are, you know, I'm not going to say infinite, but they're extensive.
Yeah.
So in that case, it's kind of, you know, you do need the tablature to indicate, right, this is what the notes are, but this is how it's played. So in that case, I agree.
A total guitar issue with Paul Gilbert, and he showed this lick that went. He used that open E to get from here.
Yeah.
which I think is dreadful. Like, it sounds like absolute shite. But just seeing that in notation, you're just going to see this pentatonic scale that goes from G up to a high C and go, how do I play that? Like, from a reading perspective,
yeah, sure. If you just saw that in notation, that you would just go, that's basically impossible.
Yeah.
Until you see the mechanics. So, but what you're really doing then is you're just saying that notation isn't a perfect vehicle for transmitting the mechanics of how something's played.
It's perfect for piano.
Yeah, because obviously there's one location for the note. It's only in that location. Can only be in that location.
And pianists are freaks because they're reading two staves. So.
You know that when I was working at the Yamaha Music School in Glasgow, we had this guy with the wonderful name of Yoshiki Kawamoto. Now, don't laugh, I know what you're thinking, but Yoshiki was actually a product of the Yamaha system in Japan, and he started playing when he was 4 years old. And he was an electone player, which is a sort of organ. And he could sight read 4 staves simultaneously.
Yeah.
He could sight read left hand, left foot, right foot.
Yep.
And he also had perfect pitch as well. Listen, wow! And he's actually won several international electron competitions. So if you're you guys out there sort of struggling to read your pathetic single line of treble clef, just remember there are guys who can read not just 2 lines but 4 lines.
That's
all
the point
at
I
once.
was going to make. Exactly that. Like, stop making excuses. You can read
exactly. You know, you got it easy. I mean, you know, just to wrap up this thing on sight reading, because I think we've probably moaned on about it enough, is that the guitar is a hard instrument to learn to read on because of the multiplicity of locations of everything. But I think the reality is, if you don't make an effort to do it, in the long run, you're never going to be as good as you might potentially be.
Yep.
I know that's probably don't want to hear that, you know.
It opens up so many interesting avenues for your own learning, like being really into the blues and jazz fusion thing. I spend most of my time with saxophone books in front of me because I can read from them.
So Levi's into sax and violins. What was that was the sound of a lead balloon dropping.
No. Well, I was just.
I've already
wondering
actually.
if I should tell people that I've seen your dungeon. Oh.
Yeah, there's a room in this house where crimes against music are committed on a regular basis. You know, they said that, you know, I've never actually killed a human being, but I've murdered a few tunes. All right, yeah. The last thing I'm going to say about this whole thing is when you're learning an instrument, you know, there's so many things that you could learn, and if you imagine that, you know, the potential of learning is walking down a corridor with all these doors open, and each door opens into this fantastic, amazing, interesting looking room that you really want to go into this room because it looks so cool and exciting, right? And if you say something like, I don't want to learn to read, what you're basically doing is just going, you're slamming that door, and you're slamming that door. I don't like this, and I don't like this, and I don't like this. The minute you start going down that route, all you're really doing is ultimately just, you know, how can I put this poetically, betraying the potential musician you might become by your own limited thinking.
You never know where you're going to end up.
Exactly.
With this instrument. When I picked up the instrument, it was to play Offspring songs, and I discovered Joe Satriani, and I was really into Slipknot. If you turned around to me and said, you know, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, this is where you're going to be and this is what you're going to be doing, I absolutely wouldn't have believed you. But it was from taking the education side of things very seriously that all happened. I
think inevitably it does. It is that the more you get interested in music, and especially if you're serious about it, it generates its own momentum. I mean, when I learned to play the guitar, I was playing like, you know, this is really embarrassing because it was back in the 80s. U2, Simple Minds, fucking Echo and the Bunnymen. Who even knows who they are? You know? See, Levi doesn't know.
I was born in 88.
Sake, man. You were born in 88? I was 18 in 1988. My God, I'm so old. It's like an Iron Maiden song, Quest for Fire, you know? And it starts off, in a time when dinosaurs walked the earth. It's like, you know, that's when I was around, and Levi's just...
You did seem really experienced when I talked about loop music and
I played quite a lot of Renaissance stuff. I was into classical guitar pretty heavily for about 5 years. I never played the actual lute, but I did play a hell of a lot of Dowland. And so yeah, I'm aware Tablature's pretty old, but not as old as me.